Welcome, everybody. This is Patrick Snow, host of the Patrick and Mary Unstoppable Author Interview Series, where we interview authors, speakers, coaches, consultants, and small business owners from all over the world to help you get what we all want, which is more time, more money, more freedom, more health, more love, and more happiness in life. Today, we have a special guest, one of my greatest friends in the entire world that I've known for which seems like about a half of a lifetime. His name is Dr. Tyler Tichelaar, who resides from Marquette, Michigan. He has been the primary editor, proofreader, book reviewer for my publishing coaching system. And without him, it's important to acknowledge that my system would not work. And so I'm so grateful for having him on our team. And I don't know the number, but it's got to be north of 500 books, maybe 1,000 books that he has edited, maybe even 1,200. I don't know the number, but it's a big number. So he's blessed to be with us. We're blessed to have him with us today. And the cool thing is, there's a whole nother side of Tyler that a lot of people don't know. They view him as the PhD, the wordsmith, the literature guru, the single greatest editor in the entire world. And all of these things are true about him, but they also don't know that he's a novelist and written in excess of 20 books. So I'm going to read you his bio so that we can get started today. Once you get out your notepad, you guys are going to learn a bunch, and I'm super excited about this. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tyler Tichelaar, who has a PhD in literature from Western Michigan University and a bachelor's degree in English from Northern Michigan University. He is the owner of Marquette Fiction, his own publishing company, and Superior Book Productions, a professional editing and book layout service. He is a former president of the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association and a former regular and guest of co-host of Authors Access podcast. If you want to follow along online to learn more about his books and purchase his books, you can do so at marquettefiction.com. Again, marquettefiction.com. Or to learn more about his editing and send a sample chapter to see if he's the right editor for you, you can go to superiorbookproductions.com. Again, superiorbookproductions.com. Dr. Tyler Tichelaar is the author of 24 books, including 9 historical novels set in Marquette, Michigan, where he is a 7th generation resident. His novels include the Marquette Trilogy, When Teddy Came to Town, Odin's Eye, a Marquette time travel novel. His nonfiction works include My Marquette, Haunted Marquette, Kawabangan, the Chief, The Legend, The Man. He has written in other genres, including Arthurian, historical, fantasy, and literature, criticism, and history. He has received several awards from his writing, including Marquette County Outstanding Writer and the Barb Kelly Award for Historical Preservation. And most recently, his books, Kawabangan and Odin's Eye, have been named Upper Peninsula Notable Books. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our special guest, Mr. Dr. Tyler Tichelaar.
Thank you, Patrick. And I am blessed to be here. You're not just blessed to have me, I'm blessed to be here.
Well, this is going to be exciting. And I got so many questions. We could probably do a half-day interview. So I'm going to try to pare this down.
Okay.
But first, let's go back to the beginning. We met when? I remember I did a speaking engagement. Talk about how we met. And I think the wonderful thing is you're like, well, I've got an extra bedroom in my basement. If you don't want to spend money in a hotel, we can put you down in the basement. So tell us about that first meeting.
Right.
How we met
Yeah.
and when that was.
It was April of 2007, and I was a member of the UP Publishers and Authors Association, and they asked you to come and be our keynote speaker for our conference that spring. And you, I think, kindly offered to stay with one of the members to save the organization money. And so I live here in Marquette. So I have an extra bedroom. So I said, yes, he can stay with me. And, I was fairly new. I had just published maybe, I think, 3 books at that point. And I just wanted to learn everything about publishing I could. And I thought, how better to do that than have Patrick stay with me? So we just hit it off, and we started talking, and you needed somebody to edit books for your clients, and we're surprised I had a PhD in English, and I, wasn't real happy in my day job at the time. So it was just the perfect synchronicity that happened there.
It certainly was. And I remember I think I had spoken in Cleveland like a couple days earlier. So I drove from Cleveland all the way through Michigan, stopped and visited
Mhm.
my relatives in mid-Michigan, drove up to the UP. And I think it took me 2 days to make that trip. And then that first night, I think we stayed up until like 2 in the morning, just talking story back and forth. And you're like,
Well,
yeah, I'm not happy with my job. I'm in this customer service role. I want to be full time in the space of writing and editing and book reviews. And I'm thinking to myself, well, here I've launched my becoming a best-selling author system, and the editors that I have in my team are lousy. I'm looking to replace those editors. I need to find something better. And I think what you did is you said, well, let me volunteer to edit your book, Creating Your Own Destiny, which was already published. I'm like, yeah, this will be a good test. Why don't you edit it and see? And then that way I can see if you're any good. Well, he did just that. And he came back a week later. And I think you found like 250 changes. And I was blown away. And from that day forward, I'm like, Tyler Tichelaar is the man. He's the guy that we're going with. And I don't know. I say a 500, I say 1,000, but of all of the clients, and I didn't realize 2007. So what is that? That's 17 years we've known each other.
yeah, 17 and a half. Yeah.
17 and a half years. We've had to have done how many books together? Like maybe 1,000. I don't know. What's the
Yeah.
number?
I'm thinking it's between 500 and 600, but it could be more. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a lot. And I got to tell you, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Without your services, my coaching system wouldn't work. So let's go back to the beginning. I want to talk about young Tyler Tichelaar growing up in Marquette, Michigan, because I was born in Petoskey, so we were not that
Mhm,
far apart. But of course, we never met
mhm.
until maybe our 30s. But what was it like growing up? When were you exposed to reading and books? And what was it that made you this fascinating reader and writer? Talk about that in your youth.
Well, I just always grew up with books. I mean, my mom would read us books at lunchtime, and we would always get books for our birthdays and holidays. And I remember the bookmobile would come to our neighborhood because we lived outside of town. So every week, the bookmobile would come, and that would be a big event, and we'd go get a bunch of books and read those. And at some point, probably when I was 5 or 6, I started taking, like you'd get those illustrated golden books or whatever they
Yep,
were when we were
yep.
kids back in the 70s. I would take those and I would get pieces of paper and I would just start copying the text and rewriting it in making my own little books. And
Wow.
then when I got to third grade, I had a friend who told me her aunt was a novelist and wrote a couple mystery novels. I think that was the first time it really hit me that being an author is a job. And everybody else was like, "Oh, I'm going to be a fireman. I'm going to be a policeman. I'm going to be a chef." But I was like, "I want to be an author." And so from third grade on, that's when I knew I wanted to be an author.
So, based on that, arguably, you had written your first book by then because you were doing that. So, do you recall maybe your first real, book, 6, 8, 10, 15 pages, children's book, your first actual piece of work that you signed your name to the outside, maybe stapled it together?
Well, yeah, about that time too, we were in third grade. We had the Young Authors program. So the first real books that I wrote were in Young Authors, and I still have them. They're made out of construction paper for the covers with lined paper inside, and we drew pictures. And the very first one was called The Little Bear, and I actually I can quote it for you.
Go
It
ahead.
was a little bear. He lived in a tree. Um, there was I forget the middle line, but the last part was he stole honey from me, and so there was like a line for each page, and then there was a picture to go with it, and it wasn't. But then the next one I wrote was about this guy who was on a boat, and the boat sunk, and the boat was rescued by another boat, and that boat sunk, and so I was kind of into the drama stories also at that point.
Well, there's a lot of sunken boats up in Lake Superior,
But there
up
are,
in
yes, lots of
Marquette, Michigan.
shipwrecks.
So, wow, wow. So, What then inspired you to write your very first book? How old were you? How did that process all go? I'm saying,
There were,
publish your first book because you had written your first book.
yeah, yeah. Well, the first book I actually finished writing was what is my book that's called The Only Thing That Lasts. It was the fifth one I published, but it was the first one I completed writing, and I was 16 when I started it. And I, at that point, was very interested in local history, market history. My grandparents would tell me stories about growing up in the area and about their parents and their grandparents growing up in the area. And so I wanted to write this historical novel. And initially I thought, well, I'll write a book about my grandpa. He'll be the main character, but the main character is nothing like my grandpa at all, but other than he's a year older than my grandpa was. But it's about a boy growing up in Marquette during World War One. He's from the South, and his parents, his father is off fighting in World War One. His mother dies, and so he has to come up to Marquette to live with his grandmother and his aunt. And it's just kind of a young adult growing up story in Marquette. And he meets his first girlfriend, he falls in love, he gets married, that kind of stuff. So that was the first one I wrote. And then from there, I went on to decide I wanted to write books that were more about history, teach more about the history of Marquette. So I wrote the Marquette trilogy, which was covers 150 years, seven generation family saga, basically. And each book covers 50
And that's
years of Marquette's
a true
history.
story that you've researched, or is that just fictional?
The main characters are fictional, but all of the events are historical. For example, Marquette burned down in 1868, so that's a historical event. What happened during World War II is all historical. So all the events are historical. A lot of historical people in the storyline, town founders, the local bishop paradox, social priests, and pretty much Native Americans. People like that are all woven into the storyline.
Can you talk a little bit about the
So
history
those
of
are,
Marquette with copper mining and iron ore and why that was so
yeah,
important?
yeah,
What was it used for?
yeah. Well, Marquette is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We do the hand thing here, so I don't know if this will work, but it's shaped like this, Michigan. So this is the Lower Peninsula. This is the Upper Peninsula. Marquette is like right here in the UP. And so when Michigan became a state, there was a war called the Toledo War because Ohio wanted Toledo and Michigan claimed it deserved Toledo. Apparently, one shot was fired before the war was settled, and Ohio got Toledo. So to compensate, Michigan was given the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
By
And
who? By who? Because was that Wisconsin
well,
land?
the U.S. government, it was just territory. I think it probably would have been considered part of the Wisconsin territory, but half of it hadn't even been ceded to the U.S. government by the Native Americans yet. That wasn't
Wow.
even done until 6 years after it became a state. So that surprises me. But people said, oh, it was a frozen tundra. It was Michigan lost as a result. But then the copper and the iron ore were discovered. And the result was a big boom. It's not as famous as the California gold rush or the Alaska gold rushes, but the truth is that more mineral wealth has come out of the Upper Peninsula than any of those other gold rushes. And as a result, it's said that the Union won the Civil War because of the iron ore that came out of the Marquette County iron mines. And so I wrote these novels to kind of just tell the history of the founding of Marquette. It was founded in 1849. Some of my ancestors arrived that year and the year after to help with the early settlement of the town. And the mining just grew and grew and grew. And I mean, the iron ore was used for everything from making cannons to ships to, all kinds of different weapons, different industries. There's still ore boats today sailing out of Marquette and going to Cleveland and Buffalo to have the ore made into steel to, make airplanes and railroads and all kinds of things.
How
So
about like
I felt like this was really the story of the great American novel could be set here in the UP because it's a story about industry and the growth of America. And so I tried to make it very much a universal story that everybody could relate to, even if they're not from here.
was a lot of that iron ore then put on a boat sent to Detroit for the auto workers and much of like Ford and GM to use some of that in their construction of their vehicles in the early days?
I would think so. I'm not completely sure about that, but probably I would think so. I mean, it was the steel industry. It was most of it was going to their places. It wasn't turned into steel here in Marquette. It went to, like I said, Cleveland,
Yeah.
Buffalo, probably Detroit.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. So, how old were you when you wrote that series, and how long did that take?
I Part of why I wrote that series was I was at Western getting my PhD, and I was very homesick from Marquette. I mean, Kalamazoo, where Western is located, is in Michigan, but it's almost 500 miles away. So and it's a whole different culture in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan than the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So I was homesick, and so I started writing those books. I was probably 27 when I started writing them, and it took me about 5 years to write the three of them. I was going to write one book, and it was going to cover 150 years of Marquette's history, and I was going to have 15 chapters, one for each decade. Well, as I started doing more and more research and trying to create a storyline, it just kept growing and growing. And so eventually it ended up being 600,000 words, and I had to chop it into three books. So,
100,000.
yep,
I would have cost an arm and a leg to have that book edited, so it's a good thing you probably did your own editing.
I did. I did.
Wow. Okay, so now you got these books actually done, and now you're looking to maybe publish. So this is maybe your first entrance into how to get a book published. So why did you decide to go the route of self-publishing?
Well, when I finished writing the first book, The Only Thing That Lasts, I sent it out to a publisher. And I was, by that point, it took me about 3 years to finish that book. So I was a sophomore in college. And I went off to college thinking I'll be an English major. I will study writing and literature and learn how to be the best writer possible. And by the time I graduate from college, I will have published a book. I won't have to go find a job. I will just keep writing books. That was my plan. Not a realistic plan, but that was my plan.
But,
So I sent
but
my first
ultimately,
book off.
but ultimately over time it kind of worked. It just took
It
longer.
did ultimately, yeah, but at 19, it didn't. So I sent the book off to this publisher. I got out what did they have back in those days? There was like a writer's market book. It was like this thick, and
Yeah.
it listed all the publishers, and you'd go through it, and it would say, okay, we publish gardening books, cookbooks, and romance novels, and you'd find the ones that you thought they would want to publish. So I sent it off to this publisher, I think in New York. And after a month or so, they sent me back this letter. By that point, they had moved to Florida, which I thought was weird. And they said, well, we love your book. We would love to publish it, but we just bought another book. Would you be willing to pay half the cost of the publishing for it? And it was like some enormous amount, like $20,000. And so I wrote back and said, well, I work at McDonald's for $3.35 an hour. So no, I can't afford to do that. And I went to one of my professors, and he's like, "Yeah, no, this isn't a real publishing company. They're a vanity press." And in those days, I mean, the 80s, 90s, it cost thousands of dollars to publish a book. I mean, tens of thousands. You heard stories of people mortgaging their houses to be able to do it. So it was before the real publishing revolution took off. And so for about maybe 14 more years, I kept writing books and sending them off to publishers and hoping and getting rejection letters, and mostly because I was writing regional fiction and they didn't think that was going to be a national bestseller. But finally, one day I said to myself, why am I letting someone in New York decide if people in Upper Michigan get to read my books? I know there are people in the UP that will want to read my books. And at that point, there were hardly any books set in the UP. Nobody was writing UP books. So I thought I would have a market and these people would be excited to read my books. So that's when I decided to self publish. I went to a local printer here, and they also gave me an astronomical quote for printing books. And so one of my friends suggested I go online. I went online. I found this company, iUniverse, and I published my first couple books through them, um, which was a good way to start. It was very inexpensive. It was like $1,000 for them to lay out my book. But the thing was, they would sell you back your copies at a large price, to the point where I could only afford to buy 100 copies at a time. And for every book that I bought, if the bookstores were going to buy the books from me with their 40% discount, I was going to lose 8 cents on every book that I published. So at that point, I joined the UP Publishers and Authors Association and just started really studying self-publishing and how to get self-published and finding more affordable ways to do it. And have just, gone on from there.
Wow, wow. Tell us about your newest novel, Odin's Eye, a Marquette time travel novel. What inspired you to write a time travel novel? Because there's a lot of
Oh,
research out there that says time travel is real. And I'm
yeah,
more and more
yeah.
believing in it.
It was well, I've always loved Marquette history. And so I've always thought, wouldn't it be cool if I had a time machine? I could travel back in time and see what Marquette looked like. Because I mean, I got all these photographs, all these documents, but it's not the same as living in that time.
Yep.
So I thought, I can't build a time machine. I don't know how to do that. So I'm going to write a time travel novel. And also at that point, kind of as a sad side note, my brother died in September of 2019, so almost 5 years now. It'll be 5 years next week. And he died because he tripped over a rug in his apartment, broke a bone in his foot, and a week later dropped dead of a blood clot. And it's just the stupidest way somebody can die. I mean, it just blew me away that it would happen like that. It's not cancer, it's not a car accident, it's just a simple bone in your foot breaks and you drop dead of a blood clot.
And he
So
was
it just
young,
felt
like he
complete.
was in his
Yeah, he was
40s,
46. Yeah,
like two
yeah,
years older than you at the time, or
2
something.
years younger. Yeah,
2 years.
yeah,
Okay. And he's
yeah. So it was
your
just
only
my
sibling
my
also, right?
only sibling. Yeah. So it was just surreal to me. And then, less than 6 months later, we're living through this pandemic. And that just it just felt like the whole world had turned upside down to me, and everything was nonsensical suddenly. And so as I was writing this time travel novel, my main character, he wakes up in another time, doesn't know how he got to that time, doesn't remember who he is, isn't sure what time he's from. And as he regains his memory, he comes to realize, he doesn't belong in 1900. He's from the future. And so I said it in he's from 2021. So he's having experienced the pandemic. The pandemic is just ending, people are getting vaccinated, that kind of stuff when it's set. But so there's this sort of surreal element going on, and then he has to figure out how to get back to his own time, which he does manage to do. But in the process, he has unknowingly changed something in the past. So when he gets back to his own time, the future that he knew is completely different, to the point where he doesn't exist in it. Something in the past screwed up his own family trees. What would have happened if one of his great grandmother married somebody else. And so,
Because of him finagling with that back in
yeah,
the day.
something that he did in the past he didn't even realize he was doing. And so, I mean, the whole story just kind of went from there. It's just a surreal experience, like the world is turned upside down. And I mean, I do resolve it all in the end, which was really the hardest part of writing the book, was trying to figure out how to bring everything to a resolution. But it was fun. It was a time travel experience back to Marquette in 1900, and it was at the same time kind of a way to work through, I think, grief and just coping with the madness of the pandemic and everything else that was happening at that time.
Was the main character in that book, was he your brother? Or was your brother part of that book in any way?
My brother is actually the main character in the book is um, the nephew of a character that my brother was based on. And at that point, the uncle had died. And so, but the character, the uncle does play a key role. His memories of his uncle do play a key role in his working through things.
And what was your brother's name again?
Daniel.
Daniel. Wow. Wow. Amazing story there. Um, what other genres do you write in?
Well, I've written some historical fantasy novels about King Arthur and his descendants. The first one's called Arthur's Legacy and retells the King Arthur story. And then I tied in all these other legends. Dracula appears in my series, Charlemagne, Roland, the French fairy Melusine, Lilith, Adam and Eve. They all work their way into the storyline somehow. So, historical fantasy. And then I've written lots of nonfiction books. So I wrote Haunted Marquette, which document about 40 different places in Marquette allegedly haunted. And I discussed what the hauntings were, if there's any basis in them being true, historical background to all of that. So it's a lot of people like it just for the history of Marquette that's in the book, even if they're not interested in ghosts. But that's one of my best-selling books because of the ghosts. Since I have a PhD in literature, I love to study literature, especially 19th century British literature and Gothic literature. So one of my more recent books was called Vampire Grooms and Spectre Brides, The Marriage of French and British Gothic Literature. And it talks about how, like in the schools, they will teach British literature, they will teach American literature, they will teach French literature. And I argue there really isn't such a thing because all of those British authors were reading French authors, and all those French authors were reading the British authors, and they were merging each other. So I show this like zigzag path of how an author, a British author like Sir Walter Scott, influenced a French author, Victor Hugo, and then how Victor Hugo influenced William Harrison Ainsworth, who was a British author, and then how maybe he influenced Dickens, and then Dickens influenced somebody in France, and that French author then influenced another British author. And so just tracing the history of Gothic literature, going back and forth over the English Channel. And I've written one biography, which you mentioned, Kabagum, the Chief, the Legend, the Man. It's about Chief Kabagum, who was the local chief of the Ojibwa here in Marquette. And it just kind of tells his life story. And his name is well known in Marquette, but most people don't know much about him. And I found out he had a fascinating story. He was rumored to have lived to be 103, and his story actually starts at Sault Ste. Marie in 1820 when the Americans had just won the War of 1812 and they came up here to build a fort. And probably his first memory was of his uncle getting mad at the Americans because the natives had sided with the British in the War of 1812. And the Americans saying, "We're building our fort here, and if you don't like it, too bad." So his first memory is really an act of American aggression against the Native Americans. And I just traced his whole life till the early 1900s. He was integral to founding Marquette. The first settlers that came to Marquette that first winter, they may well have starved to death if he hadn't helped them. And then eventually he became marginalized, pushed off to the side of the community, maybe partly of his own free will, maybe not. And then at the end of his life, he becomes this local celebrity because by that point the natives have become very assimilated. So the white people are very proud that this Indian chief who's almost 100 years old is part of their community. So I think it's just a fascinating story and kind of a microcosm of what happened to Native Americans across the course of the 19th century.
Wow, wow. So you talk about surviving a winter in Marquette. Most people don't know this, but Michigan gets a lot of snow. Northern Michigan, where I was born, Petoskey gets a lot of snow. But talk about like the snow of Marquette. When does it start snowing in the fall? When does it all melt in the spring? How deep is it?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
brutal of an existence can it be?
Well, Marquette is often, if you watch the Weather Channel, we're often known as the snowiest city in the country. Sometimes a city in Minnesota might beat us out, but we're pretty close. I could be wrong, but the record snowfall has been somewhere around 300 inches in a winter. And of course, 300 inches aren't all on the ground at once, because that would be what, like 25 feet. But the snow falls and then it melts a little, and it falls and it melts a little. But by the end of winter, it's not uncommon for the snowbanks to be 6 feet high. It depends on where you live. Like I live only a few blocks from Lake Superior. So a lot of the time what happens is the storm comes in over off Lake Superior, goes over Marquette, and then dumps in the surrounding areas. About 5-10 miles inland is where it really gets to 6 or 8 feet high. Here, typically I have at least 3 to 4 feet of snowbanks around my house. It will start snowing sometimes as early as maybe mid-October. It's not uncommon for it to snow on Halloween. When I was a kid, we would wear our Halloween costumes over our winter coats when we go trick-or-treating. Um, and it typically will start melting. I mean, there are winters when I have not had to shovel in March, which is odd, but occasionally happens. But typically, it will snow well into April and May. We had the year before last, we had a huge snowstorm on May 1st. And when I was in college, I remember we had one on May 11th that dropped about 3 feet in one day. It was just enormous. So, yeah,
That's
we have lots of
it's like
snow.
springtime. Everybody else is out enjoying the spring, and you guys are shoveling snow.
Right,
Love it.
right.
Love it. Our guest today, Dr. Tyler Tichelaar. To purchase any of his books in his series, go to marquettefiction.com. Again, marquettefiction.com. To learn more about his editing services, proofreading, book reviews, go to superiorbookproductions.com. Again, superiorbookproductions.com. So what do you like most about editing, and what do you think is the hardest part of writing? I'm sorry, what do
Well,
you think most about writing? What's the hardest part of writing?
oh, writing. I consider myself a novelist first, so I think being able to just create other worlds or to create fictional versions of the world that I know, that fascinates me. Since I'm from Marquette and I largely write about Marquette, I am just fascinated by the idea of how people are interconnected to each other. And Marquette's not that big, it's like 20,000 people. So if I don't know somebody, they probably know everybody that I know. So we're like 1 or 2 degrees separated. And so it fascinates me how all those people's lives interact and overlap. And so a lot of my books are, I call them intertextual, where the main characters in one book, there'll be main characters, there'll be minor characters. The minor characters in one book will be major characters in another book, and I'll finish writing a book and I'll think, well, there's more to that person's life story. So then I write another book about that character. And so it just kind of all interlaps. And I just have so much fun, like creating all these connections between my characters. I use a genealogy program to keep track of everybody. Um, because when it comes down to it, everybody is somehow connected to everybody else. It's this person was great grandfather was your great grandfather's maid, or uh your fourth cousins, and you don't realize it, something like that. So I just have a lot of fun creating these worlds. um typically people will say writer's block is probably the hardest thing. I don't really have writer's block anymore. Sometimes I do get stuck in trying to figure out how to work out a scene, but I've found if I just let it go, if I go take a nap instead of forcing myself to write, it'll come to me. I also find that a lot of the time, if I just go for a walk and I talk to the characters and I let them talk to me, I can usually work that out. And I just ask them, sometimes I'm just trying to get to know them. I'll just ask them questions like, "What is your favorite movie? What do you think about Donald Trump? What did you think about FDR?" If I'm writing a historical novel, um, what is your favorite food? Who is your favorite movie star? Things like that, and just get to know them. One of the hardest things I think is the inconsistencies that you catch yourself when you go back and you do the revising. And I will catch, like, I may say a character says, "Oh, my favorite movie is this" on page 27, and then on page 183, I'm like, "Oh, they said something else was their favorite movie," and so I have to catch that and fix it. So just catching the little inconsistencies like that are really hard for me sometimes.
What advice do
Six,
you
seven times through.
Yeah, well, two questions. Are you always writing a book all the time and you write daily, weekly, or do you write a book and then take a few months off? So talk about like how often you're actually writing as opposed to editing somebody else's book.
I'm usually writing a book every day. I usually will write a book, like write a rough draft, set it aside, uh, work on another book, then go back to it. I believe in giving it space and letting it settle and coming back to it with fresh eyes. So I'll often set a book aside and it'll just not be something I will work on for months or a year. Like with the time travel novel, I wrote an ending. I didn't like the ending. I could not figure out how to make it better. I set aside, I wrote my Vampire Grooms Inspector Brides book, and then a year later I went back to it and wrote the end of it. So I typically write every day. I try to write from 7 to 8 every evening. On the weekends, I'll usually write more in the morning, like maybe 11 to 1 or so. So I would say I probably write about 10 hours a week. During the day, the main part of the day, 9 to 5 or so, I'm usually editing books for other people.
Wow.
So
Okay, before we
that's
dive into that, talk about your trips to Romania. You talked about vampires, and you went
yeah,
and checked out some of these castles and did your own research. I think that's fascinating. So tell us all about those endeavors.
yeah. I've made a few different trips to Europe. I went to Turkey. I When I was on my Arthurian series, I had seen set in Istanbul, so I went to Turkey and explored Turkey a little bit, and some of that got worked into those novels. I did go to Romania 5 years ago, just because I've written all these books about Gothic literature, and Dracula is one of my favorite books. And so I wanted to go to Romania and just kind of see the places associated with Vlad Tepes, who Dracula is supposedly based on. And I also, I think traveling is just wonderful. I think traveling is how you become part of the human race. You become part of the universe, and it helps to relieve things like prejudice. You realize that all these other people are just like you, and so all of that has, just been a benefit to me. And I think in my bigger world view as I write my books.
Well, and not only that, I just looked. I still have a name badge. You attended the very first Becoming a Best-Selling Author conference in Maui, Hawaii,
Yes.
March of 2008. So we met
Yes.
2007. With a year, you were already speaking and presenting
Right.
at my conference in Maui. Then I think you came to another conference in Washington State. And
Right.
as I mentioned, you've been my number one editor, my only editor for my entire system. So now let's kind of transition and let's talk about Superior Book Productions. And let's talk about your editing business, what it is that you do. How can people, yeah, just tell us about your business, what you do.
All right. Okay. Well, I started it in 2008 after meeting you, and I edit books for people. And typically, I have a partner, Larry, who also helps me. Larry is my friend from college. We met at NMU when we were teaching assistants in the English department. We ended up sharing an office. And so after I published my first book, he actually, I think, first helped me with creating my websites because I didn't know anything about websites, and he knew a lot about websites. He did technical writing. So he started out with the websites, and then he started laying out my books after the first few for me. And then he started helping with editing also. So typically what happens if you come to us as one of our clients, you send me your book as a Word document, you email it over to me, and then Larry and I usually both will go through it and we will do an edit sample for you. Like I might edit the introduction, he'll edit chapter one, I'll edit part of chapter eight, he'll edit part of the last chapter, something like that. Just so we get a feel for the book. Um, and then you can see what kinds of changes we would make, why we would make those changes. I'll usually write comments. Sometimes it's just a matter of like following the Chicago Manual Styles way of doing things. Sometimes it's to remove wordiness or, write in a transition, whatever it is. So I send that back to the client, and then they can review the changes, make sure they're comfortable working with us. I also send back an editing agreement that explains the process. So then if you hire us, typically what happens is Larry and I each go through and do an edit, and I focus on more the organization, the content, the development, the transitions from chapter to chapter, the order of the chapters, those kinds of things. And then Larry kind of is more the copy editor person who's going through the sentences and making sure that the sentences are sentences, they're complete sentences, or fixing punctuation, grammar, that kind of stuff. And I mean, he also will make comments about the content. Of course, I'll fix typos and commas if I see them. So we kind of overlap a little bit, and but that way you get two sets of eyes like you would with a traditional publisher. You're usually going to have more than one editor or proofreader at a publishing company. So after we do those edits, we send the book back to the editor, and then the editor or the author, I'm sorry, we send back to the author, and then the author makes whatever changes they want to make based on our comments. So, we might say, I don't think chapter 18 really works. Can we cut it? Or I might say, I think chapter 18 works, but maybe you need another story here to make your point. And so then the author will write in that story. Or it might just be much smaller changes. Like, I don't really understand what the sentence is saying. Can you rewrite it? Something like that. So the editor makes their changes, then they send the book back to me, and I go through. We've used the track changes so I can see what the changes were, and then I go through and I edit all of those changes, make sure there's no typos, and let the author know if there's anything else we need. If not, I go through and I proofread the book, and I also help with writing up text for the book cover, whether you're doing a paperback or hardcover, depends on how much text will fit on the cover. So we work on that. And then it goes off to the layout person. After the layout person lays it out, we go through it again, the author and I, and we make changes to the layout for anything that needs changing. Sometimes it's just layout things, like maybe a header's in the wrong place, maybe a page doesn't have a page number. But sometimes the author will make little wording changes or find a typo, and we fix those. It's amazing things jump out in the PDFs that don't necessarily in the Word document. So I'm with the author through the whole process, basically. And then once the book is printed, I also write a book review. And once the book is for sale at Amazon, I'll post that to Amazon and my website to help promote the book for the author.
And that book review is typically a 2-page review that it's the most spectacular piece of marketing that any author can have, because it doesn't matter what we say about our books. Of course, we're going to say our own books are amazing, but when you have an unbiased third-party person writing a 2-page book review and then blasting it all over the internet, it's pretty powerful. So I want to ask you, what it is that you enjoy most about editing?
I think for me, the best part of it is, I love to play with words, so there's that. But for me, the best part is just meeting the authors, and they're all just so fascinating, and they all have their own stories, their own backgrounds. I mean, some of them I read their books and I think, oh my God, how did they get through that? And it just inspires me and encourages me. Sabrina is here on listening in the call, and I mean, she has some wonderful stories in her book about her childhood, and like there's this one story about a Christmas where her relatives didn't give her any Christmas presents, and how hurt she was by that. And I think, wow. And I mean, I felt so bad for her, and yet I can think back to Christmases that I had. I usually had pretty good Christmases, but I can remember times when you felt left out or ignored by people. And just the stories are just inspiring, and I get to meet so many interesting people. I mean, I've done books for people all over the world, and a lot of them were your clients, Patrick. That because you went to Australia and New Zealand, and you got a whole bunch of clients when you went, and so I've gotten to do all these interesting books for people from those countries, and a lot of a lot of your clients also have been people that were immigrants to the United States from different countries in Africa or Europe or South America who have come here, and they just have fascinating stories. So I just love meeting all of them. And the other part I love is that I get to work on these books that are going to be published and are then going to go out into the world and help other people. And so maybe I'm not. When I was younger, I actually wanted to be a priest or a missionary or something like that. So I'm not a missionary, but I get to write books, and I get to help other people with their books, and hopefully those books go out in the world and they make a difference for people. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's really the best part of being an editor.
And I think you're probably having an even bigger impact on people had you more so than those other careers that you mentioned, because literally you are a dream maker. You give people the confidence that their books are epic, that they're spectacular, that they're never going to be embarrassed. Nobody's ever going to say, oh, it's a good book, but you have all these errors or issues or whatever. So like I said before, Tyler, I owe you a huge debt of gratitude. My whole publishing system could not function if it weren't for you. You are the foundation of everything that we do. in becoming a best-selling author series of all of these clients. So we all thank you. And you mentioned that you said something about some of the clients. I just got to remember. I got to mention Chris Taylor's book, Avoiding Propeller Blades, from Christchurch, New Zealand. I mean, his sense of humor is off the charts. So are you having that same kind of experience where you're reading these books of these people and you're cracking up and you're laughing like, I can't believe that happened to him? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah, I mean, sense of humor definitely, but also, the obstacles that they overcame, the adversity that they have to deal with. I mean, even Chris, even though he has all this humor in his books and it's kind of this quirky off the wall humor. I mean, he has a lot of stories that are really about, dealing with challenges in your life, dealing with adversity. Um, and a lot of the books are about things like learning to love yourself or working through your past, that kind of stuff. All of that is just, going to help people. And I love that I get to help people with that.
What's your best advice for aspiring authors, and what's your best advice for the clients that come to you and they're kind of overwhelmed and they're maybe worried, or is the book any good? So best advice on someone who's thinking about writing, best advice for somebody who's like almost there and we're getting close.
I think for both, I mean, I would say you want to write what's in your heart. Don't be afraid to put down on the page what you truly think and what you truly feel, and don't be writing it for anybody else. That first draft, you have to write it for yourself. After that, when we get to the editing part, I can tell you, well, yeah, you probably shouldn't say all these nasty things about your mother-in-law because you're gonna have some problems down the road. But I mean, get all out on the page and don't be afraid of what you're gonna say. And just don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, writing is hard. I mean, I had that experience myself when I was a kid and I told people I want to be an author. I'd have people say, oh, well, writing is really hard and it's really hard to get a book published. And I just kept doing it anyway. And eventually I got sick of people telling me that. So I just quit telling people that I was writing books. I mean, other than maybe my family, I don't think even any of my friends knew that I was writing. I consider myself a closet writer. And I just thought, oh, I'm never going to tell anybody I'm writing a book until I get a book published. And then everybody will be like, wow. So, but it didn't quite work out that way. But, I couldn't let anybody stop me. And you can't let anybody else stop you either. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day how good of a writer you are. You do not have to have every sentence perfect. You just have to get your story on the page or your message on the page, depending on the kind of book that you're writing, and then everything else can be fixed. The hardest part is just filling those blank pages, and then after you have that, everything else can be fixed. I can make your punctuation marks correct, whatever you need from that point on.
Yeah, I always tell people I'm a best-selling author, but I'm certainly not a best writing author. We have Dr. Tyler Tichelaar on our team, and he's the best writing author. So just give me a D minus. I'll help you turn it into a C minus, and then we'll send it to Tyler, and he'll make it an A plus plus plus. So love that concept there. Okay, so now your clients or our clients get the book in print. What's the best advice you have for the author once the book is printed? And maybe they're not on major TV shows. Maybe they thought the whole world would end in the first 30 days and saw a trillion copies, by the end of the month. And maybe that doesn't happen. So what's the best advice you have to manage their expectations and not, give up after a month's time of marketing?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be realistic. You can't expect that Oprah's going to call you the first week and you're going to be on her show and sell a million copies. Well, I think you have to think about who your actual audience is and try to target that audience. Of course, I write all these books in Upper Michigan. It would be great if people in California or Germany or China want to read them. I actually occasionally get a book that sells in another country, but I realize my core audience is either here in Upper Michigan or they're people from here that want to read my books. So that's who I market to. And you have a core audience. You just have to think about who that core audience is and try to reach out to them. And just try to think about how you can connect to other people. If you were a Boy Scout, maybe there's a Boy Scout group that would be interested in your book. If you if you could belong to a church, see if maybe you can donate a book for the church auction or the church fundraiser to get some publicity that way. So I think you just kind of have to think outside the box, and don't think also that you have to have your book in the bookstore. I mean, I do sell books in bookstores, but I sell probably just as many books in gift shops. I sell a lot of books going to craft shows at Christmas time or in the summer art shows. Those are all great places to sell books. And don't be afraid to go out and give a talk. If you really are not a promoter and you're nervous about public speaking, I mean, join Toastmasters. I went to Toastmasters for a few years. It's a great place to get comfortable with public speaking. Hire, if you need to hire up, a speaking coach. I mean, Patrick, you can help people with that, I know. And you just have to be well, one of the big marketing people was John Kramer, and I think he said you have to be willing to throw yourself in front of a bus to sell your book. So I hope you don't go to that extreme, but that pretty much is the focus. I mean, when I started out, I made bumper stickers I put on my car and gave out to other people to put on their cars, advertising my website and my books. I made uh, postcards and I mailed them out to people. I made business cards and I passed them out to everybody I met. You just have to be willing to talk about your book. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't act like, you're being a snob or something because you published a book. Just people will want to know about your book and they will think you're a celebrity and they'll be excited to meet you. So just don't be afraid about promoting it.
What is your favorite all-time book that you've read from another author that's been a game changer, a life changer for you? Maybe your favorite author, your favorite book.
Oh, Patrick, that's hard. There's so many.
Or maybe a
Um,
couple. Maybe give us, 3 or 4 or 5 of your favorite authors.
I mean, I love the classics. So one of my favorites was Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I think that one I learned a lot about emotion and how emotion works in a book and in telling a story. I love The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, which was a retelling of the Arthurian story from the King Arthur story from the women's point of view. And so that made me think about how we can recreate stories and restructure stories and tell them anew. I love Bleak House by Charles Dickens because of the way he tells the story. He has a first person narrator in some chapters, and then he's got these other chapters that are very hard to read and obscure, and you're trying to figure out what's going on in this book. And then the first person narrator kind of comes in and helps guide you through the maze of the book. So those are just novels that I've read that I think are really helpful. Um, when I first published my first book, I read the book Stop the or Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, I think by Susan Jeffers. That one just gave me a lot of encouragement when I started out. Gone with the Wind, I mean, I attribute that one to my love of historical fiction. It fascinated me and made me really into historical fiction when I was a kid. Um, so just there, I mean, there's so many. The Wizard of Oz, Little Women, just so many books that I've read and I love. I still read Dracula. I mean, Dracula is a wonderful book because it's written in as a series of letters and documents, and all these different people are writing about their experiences with Dracula, and then they put them all together to create the book Dracula. And so it's the narrative technique is fascinating to me.
Mm. I remember when I stayed that night as a guest in your house before speaking the next day. If I remember correctly, you had a huge collection of books like in your basement. Do you
Yeah, yeah.
you still have? I mean, how many
Oh
books do
yes.
you own? How many books do you own?
I don't know because when I got to about 1,200, I quit counting them. I used to count them like once every year or two, but I'm sure I have more than 2,000.
Do you,
I don't
do
know.
you ever get rid of books or do you just like keep growing?
I do get rid of them occasionally. I go through and I weed out, a dozen or something and send them off to, Salvation Army or somewhere or donate them to the library. But I often find if I get rid of a book, like 5 years later, I'm like, oh, I should have kept that one. I want to read it again. So,
So here's a question for you. you basically are full-time editor, proofreader, book reviewer. You are the doctorate of all writing. You're the most talented person in the world that I know in this space. So that probably takes up a big part of your day. And then it sounds like you're writing every evening from 7 to 8 or on the weekends. Do you
Mm.
also make time to continuously read new books, more books? Is that also
Oh
part of your
yeah,
life still?
yeah,
Or you don't have time
yeah.
for that anymore?
Oh no, I read constantly. I get up every morning and read for an hour or so while I have my coffee. I usually read just before I go to bed. So yeah, constantly I'm reading.
And where do you find your books? Internet, bookstores, library, Amazon?
Oh, all kinds of places. I mean, I love ebooks, so I read lots of ebooks now, Kindle ebooks, just because I don't have room in my house for a whole lot of more paper books. So I try to read ebooks. But yeah, we have a wonderful bookstore here, Snowbound Books in Marquette. It's one of the few independent bookstores left, and so I buy books there. I used to go all the time when the library would have like a used book sale, but now I just have to stay away from those because I just have too many, too many books. I can't go buy a bag full of books, but
Well,
one or two at a time.
I noticed that, I have these readers here and I don't have
Hmm.
perfect vision when I'm driving or when I'm out, whatever, but anything
Hmm.
in front of a
Hmm.
computer books, I've got these readers. How are your eyes? Because I would think someone that spends that much time reading, and I notice you have no glasses on right now. So tell
Yeah.
me that part of your story.
My eyes are pretty good. I didn't get glasses till I was about 32 or so, I think, and I just use them mainly for working on the computer. Oddly enough, I find that I cannot read a paper book wearing my glasses. I have to take them off. And I do find it harder to read paper books, especially at night under artificial light, which is
Yeah.
part of why I get up early in the morning to read when it's daylight. And also partly why I read ebooks because they're easier to read on the screen than paper books are for me at
Yeah,
this
a
point.
story about you. One of our clients was writing a book, and there was this scene in the 17 1800s about this ring that was on this ship, and they were going to give this ring to this person or whatever. And then you said, well, and you caught it and you said, in that actual era that ring hadn't been invented or created yet, so we need to change the dialogue or the text to make it more historically accurate. And this client was blown away that you knew your history so well that you
Yeah,
even win these different rings. So you recall that story?
right. Yeah, there's a lot like that where I don't know. I'm just curious. I had another book where it was set during the American Revolution and the character was growing geraniums and I don't know why, but I just thought would they have had geraniums? And I looked it up, and no, there were no geraniums in North America during the American Revolution. Thomas Jefferson introduced them like after 1800. So, little things like that I'll just catch and try to, steer the author in the right direction. And partly, I just love history. So I catch a lot of historical things as a result.
You shared about some of your mentors or some of your favorite authors. Who are some of your favorite historical figures that have shaped you, that have shaped our world? Who do you admire in that space?
Well, the first one comes to mind is Peter White, who was one of the founders of Marquette. He was a huge philanthropist, and he had his hands in everything. The library is named for him. The library is my favorite place in Marquette, so of course I love him. He also gave us our wonderful park, Prescott Park. He was an Episcopalian, but any church that needed a roof, he would help that church find money to build a roof. He owned the bank. He was a real estate agent, so he did all kinds of wonderful things for Marquette, and I absolutely respect and love him. I know he may not have been perfect, but he makes an appearance in a lot of my novels just because he was such an important person in Marquette. Um,
How about
I
FDR?
mean, if
I mean,
I
you wrote a book about FDR. So is he in that space also?
no, I didn't write anything about FDR.
Oh, I'm
He's
sorry.
yeah, no. I would say I don't know. I have a lot of admiration for Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
Just that he was so determined that there was no way Hitler was going to take Britain. And he just, this the wonderful speeches that he gave, I love. And he was just hilarious in a lot of ways too. He had this friend, this woman friend, and they would fight all the time and say nasty things about each other. And she would say things to him like, if I were married to you, I would give you poison. And he would come back with, if I was married to you, I would take the poison. So I mean, he's down to earth. So I love him, and just lots of authors. Like Anthony Trollope is my all-time favorite author. He was a Victorian novelist and wrote like 40 books, and he was really down to earth. When he published his autobiography, his reputation dropped because in his autobiography he talked about his writing process. And he said every morning he would get up and he would force himself to write like 2,000 words, and he would not leave his bed until it was done. And he had this like system for calculating how many words he wrote every day. And everybody was like, no, writing is this magical thing where you're inspired. I'm like, no, it's not. And Anthony G. Trollope like put the stake through the heart of that myth. It is hard work. You sit and you write every day and you give yourself a goal and you just do it. You may not feel like doing it that day, but you just have to do it. And so I greatly admire him for that.
And then over your right shoulder, there's a historical figure on the wall that's framed in that black frame.
Oh, that's
I'm curious about who that
that's
is.
that's Oscar Wilde, the famous playwright. He wrote The Importance of Being Earnest. That's probably his best known play. And I got that poster when I went to Dublin in 1993.
Mm.
So I have him hanging on the wall. I used to have Dickens, but my Dickens poster somehow got mold, so he's gone. But I have all kinds of posters of authors, of Irish writers, posters, famous writers, pictures of scenes from novels, that kind of stuff.
So I think that you and I are alike in many ways, but we're different in one way, and that is, like the Harry Potter series came out, and all the
Mm.
kids and teenagers are reading it. And they're like, "Are you going to read the Harry Potter? Because the movie's coming out in like 3 months. You got to read the book." And I'm like, "No, I'm just going to wait for the movie. I don't have time in my life to read, 800 pages." So for Dr. Tyler Tichelaar, do you watch the movie or read the book? Which is better, or you do both?
I'll usually do both. I generally prefer the book. There are a few exceptions, but usually I prefer the book. But if I've read the book and the movie is coming out, I'll go see the movie usually.
And does the movie ever do the book justice, or do you always walk away thinking, you know what, they missed this, they forgot about that, they didn't develop this character?
Um, I would say most of the time that's my reaction to the movie, but there are some, like I said, there are some exceptions. One of the other UP authors here is Karen Dion, and she wrote a book called The Marsh King's Daughter, which was just made into a movie last year. And I thought that they did a wonderful job with the movie. It was filmed. It looked like it was set in the UP, and they were very truthful to the plot. But then other movies, I'm like, no, you just ruined it for me. So I'll wait for the video because I don't expect it to be good.
Yeah. Wow. So what's next for Dr. Tischler? What do you have on your roadmap moving
Well,
forward?
my next novel is called The Mysteries of Marquette, and it is my biggest book yet. It looks like my layout person Larry is telling me it's going to be about 800 pages long, and it is set after the Victorian period. There was this genre, the city mystery genre, and it kind of was like the start of detective novels. So the first one was by Eugene Sue in France. He wrote The Mysteries of Paris, and that book was so popular that pretty soon in England they were writing The Mysteries of London, and then there was The Mysteries of Lisbon, and The Mysteries of Marseille, and The Mysteries of New York, and all these other cities. Well, Marquette never got its own mysteries book, so now I'm writing it. And it's full of crime and corruption and murder and family secrets. And so it's kind of very much a Victorian sensational melodrama story. It's set in Marquette in 1908.
But all
And so I
based
did
on all based on real events, it sounds like.
Well, no, the main characters are fictional and most of the events are fictional, but there's a lot of historical background. So, like, for example, Peter White, who I mentioned, he died in 1908. So his death is part of the plot line. There's a firemen's tournament held in Marquette. So that was part of the plot line. Counterfeiting was a big thing that year. And so that is part of the crime that happens involves counterfeiting.
Mm,
So
very
yeah,
good.
it's got multiple plots and lots of secrets revealed by the end. So we'll see.
So somebody wants to write and publish a book and they got their manuscript done, they feel like they're ready to go, but they're missing the editing piece. So, how is the best way for people to get a hold of you, to send you the manuscript, to engage with them on an editing job for your book? What's the protocol? How does that work?
Sure,
Take us through that
sure.
process.
Well, I would say the best thing to do is just send me an email and let me know that you're getting ready to have your book published, or if you're done, just attach the manuscript as a Word document. I do want to usually see the entire manuscript because I need to know how long the book is, what the word count is, all that to come up with a price for you. So yeah, just email it over to me as a Word document. Usually I'll get back to you within a few days with an edit sample and a price and a agreement, and we can go from there. Or if you have questions, you're welcome to call me. My number's 906-226-1543. That is a landline. I don't text because as I was telling Mary earlier, I have big fingers. I'm terrible at spelling. My texts go out and they make no sense. And I'm the editor, so I hate typos. So just email me or call me. My email is Tyler at superiorbookproductions.com. Our website is superiorbookproductions.com. And if you go there, we have some resources and discussion of what the editing process and the layout process all look like, that kind of stuff, if you're interested in learning more about our services.
So, Tyler at superiorbookproductions.com. And then phone number 906-226-1543. 906-226
Yep.
1543. And ultimately
Yes.
you edit a chapter for your client at no cost to them so they can get
Yes.
a sampling of how good of an editor you are. And then you
Right.
also can get a sampling of how bad of a writer they are. And I don't mean how bad of a
Or
writer,
good. Or good.
or good. So that helps you out significantly. Um, okay, so I'm just trying to think. Your favorite, if we could only read one of the Tyler Tichelaar's book series, where would we start? What's the best book series or best book of yours that we should read first?
I would probably say read my first book, Iron Pioneers. It's the first book in my trilogy, and it really sets up the storyline for all my other books. Because like I said, all my books are kind of intertextual. So that book is about the founding of Marquette in 1849 and the people that came here, the immigrants and the New Englanders who came to settle the area. And it takes the story up to 1900 through a few generations. And if you like that, go on to the rest of them.
Very good. Very good. Well, you are the most talented editor and writer I've ever experienced in my life. I've sent you numerous articles, poetry, anything that I'm working on, website copy. I send it to you, and like 45 minutes later, I get an email, and boom, it's all fixed. And I'm like, just don't even tell me about the edits. Just make the edits, send it back so I can just take it to press or whatever I'm doing with it. And I love that about you. Your timing is spectacular. And I don't, and I would say that my own writing skills have increased tremendously from all of the things you've edited for me. So I'm deeply grateful for you. Um,
Thank you.
as we wrap this up, is there anything that we missed? Any bits of wisdom or nuggets of information? Anything that we didn't talk about you and your writing career, you and your editing career? Anything else that you want to share with the audience that we have maybe not talked about today?
Well, you told me when we began that we would end with asking me what unstoppable meant. So I've been thinking about that. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, let's do that next. But any other nuggets of
Okay.
wisdom?
Oh, okay.
Any other
Um,
writing advice? Anything else that you think is important that maybe we missed?
well, I think probably in terms of writing, I think the most important thing is to realize that you don't need huge chunks of time to write a book. You can do it in an hour a day, even 15 minutes a day. I set I mean, people think that I sit around writing 8 hours a day. There's no way I could do that. On a good day, if I have nothing, like on a Sunday, if I have nothing else to do, I might write 2 or 3 hours. But after that, that's it. Writing is in some ways it's extremely invigorating, but it's also sometimes very draining of your energy. Um, so you don't need huge amounts of time. My goal is 500 words a day. And I don't think 500 is a huge amount, but I mean, most days I can probably write 1,500, 2,000 words in a couple of hours, but 500 is my goal. And some days 500 is a lot. Some days all you can get is 300 out. But if you do it a little bit every day, I always tell people, if you just write 1 page a day, by the end of a year, you will have a book. It's
Mm.
365 pages. That's a huge amount of writing to do.
Well, you've certainly inspired me in a huge way. I, like many others, maybe I'm guilty of spending too much time on social media. By the end of the day, I might be like a little bit exhausted and I don't want to really think. And so I had the phone in front of me and all of a sudden these Facebook videos, or I'm checking my fantasy football team or whatever, who should I draft, or all these
Mhm.
things. And then AI
Oh,
sends you the next video, or I love country music. So country music love songs come on. I would listen to one after another. And all of a sudden I wasted an hour. You've inspired me to be done with that and just sit down and write my next book in that hour, 8
good.
to 9 p.m. every night. And I think I could do that. And you've shown me the way. So I'm grateful for
Mhm.
that.
Great. Thank you.
So this program is called the Patrick and Mary Unstoppable Author Interview Series. And we call Mary, our producer, we call her Mary Unstoppable West, MUW. And now we call her Mary I Am Unstoppable. So she is the pioneer behind this show. So I want to ask Dr. Tyler Tichelaar, how do you define the word unstoppable?
Well, I think I would say it means just keep going. Don't let anything get in your way. Like I said earlier, I had people telling me, "Oh, writing's hard." If I'd listened to them, I never would have written my first book, much less 24 books. And life happens. I mean, when my brother died, I was just like, it was like being hit by a truck. It was the last thing I expected would happen. And I still had to keep going. There was about a week after that. I didn't write anything. I was just like too busy with the funeral and worrying about how my parents were reacting and all that. But I had to keep going. And I ended up writing that time travel novel, which was largely, even though I didn't realize it when I started, largely based on my experiences with my brother in the pandemic. And I mean, those were big things, but they all are material for your future books. So just keep going. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Don't and don't be your own worst enemy and tell you and let that voices in your head tell you that you're not good enough. Just keep writing. I think Van Gogh maybe said something like, um, say if you hear a voice, he was a painter, Van Gogh. There's a saying something like, if you hear a voice in your head say you cannot paint, then paint, and that voice will be silenced.
Mm.
So you just have to do it. And
And a
once
book
you
is
do
a
it,
masterpiece. A book is a painting. A
oh,
book is a tool. A book
oh,
is a way to change humanity. A book is a way to serve. Wow. Very good. Okay, so as we wrap up, I'm going to give everybody contact information. Pick up a copy of any of Dr. Tyler Tichelaar's books. Go to marquettefiction.com. Buy them direct off his website. That way, Amazon doesn't take a huge cut. So, marquettefiction.com. If you're interested in working with Dr. Tyler Tichelaar and his business partner, Larry, go to superiorbookproductions.com. Superiorbookproductions.com. His email is tyler@superiorbookproductions.com. And also, if you want to call him and talk to him on the phone, 906-226-1543, 906-226-1543. From the bottom of my heart, Tyler, thank you for all the blessing that you brought to my life. Thank you for allowing my publishing coaching system to be functional. Without you, we couldn't do it. I think we make a great team, and I'm just blown away that it's been 17 and a half years since we met when I accepted that speaking engagement at the Upper Peninsula Authors Association. That that weekend, whether you realize it or not, it completely changed the trajectory of my business, and I owe a debt of gratitude to you. So thank you so very much. Are you able to stick around and
Yeah,
do a Q&A?
sure, absolutely.
All right, so let's give Dr. Tyler Tichelaar a big hand. Thank you so much. This has been
Thank you. Thank
spectacular.
you.
Okay, we're going to turn the recording off, and we're going to open up for a group photo and Q&A.